Hi there, everyone. So I'm Sue. I work in the recruitment team for undergraduate students. Marco, I've already met you, so hi again. And Karen, welcome to the talk. And welcome to everybody else who's watching this on record. There's a picture of me on what I like to call the Disney campus. I actually work in Europe, so it's all on one site. It's a great experience. And some people would argue that's a bit like a university campus, but obviously we haven't got the rides and things. So we're going to talk, both of us, about the differences really between undergraduate experience on a campus university in the UK and one where you're more city-based or where your university is spread across the city. And as you'll see as we go through, there are some grey areas really. So some universities you might actually be getting something of a city and a campus experience. So we'll go through that in a bit more detail as we go on.
And I'm Angus, and I am a student recruitment intern, and I'm working with Sue this year. I'm also a student at the University of Bath. I'm currently on my placement year, and so I'm working with the university. However, I'm also a student, so I feel like I've got the best of both worlds, that I know what it's like to be a student, and I'm also working with the university. The University of Bath's a campus university, so I can give you kind of an insight what it's like to be a student at a campus university.
And this is where we're based, in the city of Bath. And you can see I'm floating in an aerial view of our campus. I think you'll see again as we go through the slides. And Angus is pictured there in front of our campus. But our lovely city is actually a really wonderful city in itself that has the huge advantage of being one of the safest and most beautiful cities in the UK. So wherever you're looking, you need to look at the local area. And that's a really important part of any decision about whether you look at a campus university or whether you look at a city university. So at University of Bath, we're very well located. We are close to London by train, only 80 minutes to London by train. And knowing that will make you understand what your experience may be like on a campus university, because some campuses can be a long way from any cities. Some city universities, even the university itself, may not be in the centre of the city. So it's understanding those connections that will be very important in how you choose, not just that campus or city experience.
Okay. We were going to do a little bit of an interactive element. However, I think we'll leave this out due to a lot of the students who are watching this in post. So we won't do that today. Okay, so I'm going to begin now to talk a little bit about campus universities. And as Sue mentioned earlier, here is an overview of the campus. And what we kind of mean by a campus university is one which is quite separate from the city. You can see there that the university is kind of immersed in green space. It's got all its facilities in one space. It's got its accommodation on campus. It's lots of facilities, lots of restaurants and cafes and things like that. And that's kind of all there in one localized spot. And that can be really quite good for students. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the advantages of what it's like to study on a campus. So the first point here we've got is it's easy to socialize. And what we mean by this is that there's obviously a lot of students on campus. You've got some really great spaces to go and actually socialize. So in the cafes, in the nice kind of green spaces. The next kind of point I'm going to move on to is the idea that you've got accommodation close to your lectures. So in your first year, you might live on campus. And that means that you can really walk to and from and around the campus quite quickly. So I know when I was in my first year, I'd go to a lecture and then I'd go back for lunch, and that was like about a 5-minute walk. So it depends a lot on the university. However, often there can be shorter distances between the facilities on site and the facilities which you might want to use at university, and then your first year accommodation. As briefly mentioned before, you've got sport on site. So this is a great thing to get involved in as a student, and being able to make shorter distances to go and make the most of it makes it more easy to get involved. You've got your support services, similar to sport. Having them there on campus is really useful. Obviously, in city universities and bigger campuses, those are still there, but being on a campus and having them so close can be a slight advantage. You've got your green space, and kind of campuses can feel quite quiet, and that's quite nice. The University of Bath, we've got lots of green space. You can go for some really nice walks around campus, sit by our lake, and that's just quite nice, and take a book, and it's really going to be quite relaxing. I think one of my favorite things about campus universities is this kind of community feel you get. Having so many students in one space, having on-campus accommodation and all the student facilities there, you see people you know a lot, and you'll start to feel a part of that community. You might be walking between lectures and bump into someone you know, and that's a really nice thing. And the final point I've got here is this idea of it being quite affordable. So things like the campus restaurants and cafes are more student-based prices, and the same sort of thing for nightlife. The University of Bath, we have an on-campus club, and some other universities have that too. So those will be more affordable for students. Now we're going to start to look at some of the cons of being on a campus. So it could be said that you might be away from the action. Say that your campus is in quite a big city, and the campus is not based down in the city itself. You might then have to get buses down there, and you might feel a bit left out of that. In your first year, some people have said being on a campus isn't exactly like being in real life, because it's apart from the city, as I just mentioned, it's a bit insular. It's kind of like a bubble, but that's really nice. You've got everything there, but it depends what you kind of want in that respect. Another thing you've got to consider is your transport connections. So to get to campus after your first year, you'll have to get buses and things like that. Usually these cities will have very good bus connections. However, it's an additional thought that you will have to make that commute. Limited architecture and environment. It's a singular campus, so there's only what is on campus. And the kind of final point here is that if you want to stay at campus in holiday times, or say something over like Christmas break, a lot of students will go home. So that means that the campus will feel a little bit less busy. In term times, campuses are really busy and they have a certain buzz to them. But when it comes to holiday times, a lot of students will go home and it might not feel quite as active. And that's something which a city university might have a slight advantage, because the city will always have people walking around and you'll feel very involved. I'm now going to hand back across to Sue, who's going to talk a little bit about city universities.
Thank you, Angus. So, city universities, I would define as universities where your buildings for your teaching and where you live and where you spend your time at university services and events and so on are spread across the city. So the picture you're seeing is of our local university in Bristol. So Bristol is a city about 10 minutes away from Bath, and the campus is very different there. It's not really a campus. So you will see that some city universities call their university a campus university, or describe parts of the university as a campus, but it is quite distinct from the kind of campus that we have at Bath. So I think that's where that distinction is sometimes hard to make, that you have city universities that have small elements of that campus experience. Perhaps they have all their accommodation together. So one of my daughters went to Edinburgh University, which is very much a city university spread across the lovely city of Edinburgh. So she spent time walking across the city to her lectures and different areas of the university, and past all of the other things along the way in the city in terms of facilities and coffee shops. So it does have that sense in a city university that you're part of a real city life, and that buzz is what students often really like. And the other things that you'll find will be in a larger city like London or Edinburgh, you're going to get much more in the way of culture and activities than you would in a smaller city or a campus. So that's something to think about, not just in terms of whether it's a campus or city, but whether the city has enough to sustain you in terms of the interest around you and how accessible it is. So if you work, if you study where I used to work many years ago at London School of Economics, your university is right in the centre of London, very close to Covent Garden and well-known places in the centre of London, which is a really fantastic experience to have. As you go to your lectures day to day, you're also passing these world-renowned landmarks. If you're on a campus university like Bath, that wouldn't necessarily be the case, even though we've got our historic city nearby. So is that what you want? I know when I went to university, and we're really talking a long time ago, I just wanted to go to London because I wanted that London experience, and I came from a much smaller town outside of London. So if you know you want a large capital city, then somewhere like London will probably be your first thought. And there will be so many options for you in terms of nightlife, in terms of the diverse city community, and the fact that even in the holidays, even if you're staying in the city in the holidays, it's still going to be very vibrant in a larger city because the rest of the city community doesn't move away necessarily in the holidays like the students do. Even larger cities can be a bit quieter in some of the holidays. If you were in the centre of London on Christmas Day, probably still be quite quiet. But if you're on the campus at Bath on Christmas Day, you probably have some facilities put on for you specifically as a student. So it's a very different lifestyle that you have to decide what's right for you. You know, you really have to think about what's really important for you. Do you want to have amazing galleries and shops right next to your university or within a tube ride or metro ride? Or are you happy to go up to London from somewhere like Bath and just do that as a day trip to really, make the best of both worlds? So that's the sort of pros of city life and city universities. I'm sure you will have already thought about one of the main disadvantages of studying at a university like London, and that is expense. And it can be very expensive to rent in a capital city in the UK, even some of the other larger cities. So it's something to look at, because it's not just determined by whether a university is a city or campus. What you'll find for most universities is that the first year you will be in halls of residence that are fairly similarly priced across the country, with some places a little bit cheaper than others. But somewhere like London is always going to be more expensive. So the accommodation in your first year provided by a university will be expensive, but also you're probably going to have to be traveling a lot more to get to your lectures in your second and third year. So certainly when I lived in London, I commuted to London School of Economics to work there. My journey was about 45 minutes, and most of my students were doing the same thing. They had to live in affordable rented areas that were not close to where they were actually studying and taking their lectures in up beyond that first year accommodation. So that's something really to bear in mind. Same goes for sport. If you want to get very involved with sport, I would recommend not going for a city centre university unless you're absolutely sure that you can be committed to doing the travel that probably takes you out to the greenfield space that you play football or rugby or your sport, unless there are facilities provided nearby. That can be quite difficult. And then finally, what's it like as a student experience? Well, one of the YouTube clips that I just picked up when I had a look at my old place at LSE was this student who was talking about the pros and cons of LSE, and lack of community came up. And I think that is something that people do sometimes feel about living in a larger capital city, that you don't get that sense of student community as easily as when you are on a campus. So does it feel less welcoming? Does it feel less safe because of that, because you don't have people around you when you live further out? It's a question to ask yourself, and it may be more, you need to be more proactive about researching where you're going to live and where it's going to be safe, where you're going to be near other students, and also just being more proactive to arrange to socialise. Because as Angus said earlier, when you're on a campus, it's very easy on a campus or a small city to actually get to see your friends, even when you've moved out into the local area. When you live in London, you could be living an hour away from friends who happen to have chosen to rent at a different district in the city. So think about all of those things if you are interested in that city life. I would say those are relatively the most important disadvantages potentially of some of the city universities. Do you want me to take this one, Angus? I can't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll carry on. Just let me have a glass of water first. But I'm leaving the image there so you can try and guess why we put a bit of cake up there. But it's that English phrase, have your cake and eat it, which I never really understood why, because it's, if you have a piece of cake, why wouldn't you eat it? But the idea is that you're getting both the best of both experiences we're talking about, and that does really apply for a lot of universities. So you may think you're someone who needs a city university to be in the middle of a city, but maybe you could be looking at a university that has its own campus but is very close to a city. So Bath is not as big a city as London, but it does have a lot of the things that you might look for in a city in terms of shops and services and cafes. The same with University of York, very similar, campus university at the edge of a large historic city. And then some of our larger cities in the UK, like Birmingham and Nottingham, they are large cities with a lot of those facilities that may even start to rival the facilities that you get in London in some areas. But they will have also a campus where you might be able to study and live in your first year. So you could be looking at larger cities with campuses, or you could be looking smaller cities with the university we've woven into the city. It's not as clear cut as a university is either a city or a campus university. And if you really want to go to London, maybe you think about some of the satellite universities that are on the edge of London rather than in the centre. So Royal Holloway is actually counted as a London university, but it's like a stately home campus on the edge of the city. I went to a university called Roehampton, which is similar. It's actually right next to one of the loveliest parks in London on the outskirts. So you can have that experience of some green spaces by living in the edge of London or studying in the edge of London, but still possibly being able to get onto a tube or metro to use those facilities. So think about how you like to live on a day-to-day basis. Imagine where you are now and how where you're thinking of studying will actually vary, and what you'll like about that, what you're actually looking for, and what you know you really don't like. So if you know you don't want to be somewhere where you have to rely on buses every single day because that's the only form of transport, maybe a city would be better for you because you're going to have a greater variation of transport options. But as we said earlier, you're going to have to manage that a bit more proactively. If you've ever been to London, you will know that the tube map, the metro map is very complicated, and it takes you a little while to get used to orientating yourself when you're in a large city. Whereas somewhere like Bath, it'd be very hard to miss the student bus going from the city to the Bath because it's one of the main routes. So it's very easy to get used to that. Wouldn't you agree, Angus?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kind of following on from that, what we're going to do is we're going to start to talk about what are those kind of factors which are important for you. And I think that's kind of the best way to make the decision on the sort of university you should go to, is kind of looking at those individual factors. So making friends quickly. Obviously, about any university you go to, you'll be able to make friends. However, campus universities could be said to have a slight edge here, that they have societies on campus, they've got all their facilities on campus, and that kind of idea of going back to what I was saying earlier of a community, often campus universities can seem to have a stronger community, just the way that they're structured. We've got easy to travel, what Sue was just talking about there, that different city universities will have more options in bigger cities will have more options in terms of travel, potentially. But it really does depend on the university itself, and it could be a case that where you're living in your second and third year could be very close to a campus university, or the other way around. So that really does depend, and would definitely be worth looking into on a case-by-case basis. Cultural experiences. So again, like Sue was saying, that you've got sometimes you have historic cities where they have a campus just outside, so you can definitely go and make the most of that. Or you might want to be very embedded in a city where you have quite easy access to these cultural experiences. Sports facilities, as Sue was saying, sometimes you might have to travel to get to those sports facilities. If, however, on a campus, they're all quite condensed in one space. We've got the idea of city buzz. If you are on campus, you'll have to travel for that. However, if you're living in a city, it's very there, you're living it, and you're very involved in that atmosphere. Green spaces, cities will have those big green spaces. However, they won't necessarily be incorporated into the university. Some cities will, city universities will have those green spaces. However, on a campus, they definitely will have those, and campuses have lots of green space. So you've got the idea of being close to your labs, library, and student unions, clubs. And again, it depends a lot on the universities. Fresh air, great places to walk on campuses. Your music venues, so you need to look into the sort of city and the sort of what it's got there available. Outdoor festivals, and easy to access support services and academic help. All universities will try to provide this. It's really important to be actually able to make the most of those services. And international shopping and food. So these are some quite important, looking back at this list, is a good thing to consider when trying to make this choice, and weighing up those options, you can then try and find a university which has a balance of all those things. So
just to add, and we probably didn't mention it, obviously one of the first things you're going to be thinking about is your course. And we haven't mentioned that at all because we've been talking about your environment. But I think a good choice of university, and as the last slide said, what is right for you. What's right is right for you. Is that right?
yeah.
So what's right for you is right for you. So that goes for your environment much more probably than your courses, because it's your courses, you will probably have lots of choice of the specific course that you are looking at. You will take into account other factors like the rankings of the course, the teaching methods, the assessment methods, the popularity of the university with employers and graduate opportunities and work placements. There are all sorts of things that you will choose, and you've no doubt heard other speakers talk about that. But if you make your choice solely on that and you do not think about the environment that is right for you, then that's a risk to you in terms of actually succeeding academically. So remember, if you're coming to the UK to live in the UK, then you have to understand that where you live is a big part of your student life. That's the student experience in the UK. So you really need to think about making the most of that and really ticking off all the things that you want when you make that final choice by marrying up your course choices with the kind of environment. And the very best way to make that judgment, obviously, is to be able to visit a university before you make your final choice. That's quite difficult at the moment, as we know, because of the restrictions on travel and so on. But there are lots of virtual films online. There's lots of student bloggers who are helping you with that research process. And you certainly should get a chance, hopefully, if you're applying for 2021 or beyond, to come and visit at some point before the start of your course, definitely for 2022, fingers crossed.